Lake Superior, 31,700 square miles of pristine, crystal clear water. But the big lake they call Gitchigumi has a dark side. 50 years ago, November 10th, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank beneath the waves when the gales of November came early. In 1957, the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company contracted the Great Lakes Engineering Works of River Rogue, Michigan, to build a ship to haul taconite from Duluth, Minnesota down to Detroit, Michigan, or Toledo, Ohio. The ship was designed to be within a foot of the allowable length for the soon-to-be-completed St. Lawrence Seaway. At 729 feet with a deadweight capacity of 26,000 long tons, the Edmund Fitzgerald is the longest ship of its time and was dubbed the Queen of the Lakes, up until 1959, when the SS Murray Bay, at 730 feet, was launched. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was named after the Northwestern Mutual board and president, Edmund Fitzgerald. Even though he tried to dissuade the board from naming the ship after him and wanted it named something else, such as the Northwestern, the board voted unanimously, 36-0, to name the new freighter the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. For 17 years, the Fitz hauled taconite pellets from the Iron Range mines north of Duluth, Minnesota. The ship was a record-breaking workhorse and often broke its own records up to 6 times. Its record load for a single trip was 27,402 long tons. A long ton is equal to 2,204 pounds, used in measuring commonly used with measuring water displacement for ships. The Edmund Fitzgerald logged an estimated 748 round trips from Duluth, Minnesota, down to Detroit, Michigan, or Toledo, Ohio. One round trip from Duluth to Detroit would take an average of 5 days. Strong storms were not uncommon on Lake Superior, although sometimes hurricane-force gales and 30-foot waves are a hazard that ships can come across. And on November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald set out for its last voyage across the Great Lake, unknowingly steaming towards her doom. The Fitz loaded up in Duluth, Minnesota with a destination of a steel mill on Zug Island near Detroit, Michigan. Loaded with 26,115 long tons of taconite pellets, the freighter left port at 2:15 p.m. The Edmund Fitzgerald crew of 29 men, including Captain Ernest McSorley, who had over 40 years of experience on the Great Lakes and oceans shipping. By 5 p.m., the Edmund Fitzgerald met up with another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, captained by Jesse B. Bernie Cooper, and the ship was heading from Two Harbors, Minnesota to Gary, Indiana. The National Weather Service had predicted a winter storm that would pass just south of Lake Superior by 7 a.m. the next morning, November 10th. But by 7 p.m., the National Weather Service had changed its forecast, issuing gale warnings for the whole of Lake Superior. The Fitzgerald and the Anderson's captains both decided to alter their course from the usual Lake Carriers Association downbound route to a longer but much safer passage along the Canadian shoreline in Ontario. By 1 a.m. on November 10th, the Fitz recorded winds of 52 knots or 60 miles per hour and waves 10 feet high. By 2 a.m., the National Weather Service had upgraded its gale warning to a storm, 40 to 58 miles per hour. Up until this point, the Fitzgerald was following the Arthur M. Anderson, but by 3 a.m., the faster-moving Fitzgerald passed the Anderson. The wind speeds were being logged at 50 knots or 58 miles per hour and were increasing rapidly. By 2:45 p.m., with the Fitzgerald about 17 miles ahead of the Anderson, it began to snow. With visibility near zero for most of the rapidly darkening afternoon, the trip had remained uneventful until 3:30 p.m.
I have experienced some topside damage. I have a fence rail laid down. 2 vents lost or damaged. I am taking on water and I have a lift. Do you still have your pumps going? Yes, both of them.
The Fitzgerald had 4 7,000-gallon per minute ballast pumps and 2 2,000-gallon per minute auxiliary pumps coming in through the vent covers. The Fitzgerald and the Anderson were heading toward the calmer waters of Whitefish Bay on the eastern end of Lake Superior, approximately 75 miles south of where their position was at this time. By 4:10 p.m., McSorley radioed Cooper and the Arthur M. Anderson.
Yeah, both my radar antennas. The carrier wave was live. I need your assistance navigating your over.
We'll provide you with radar plots to guide you to Whitefish Point. Over.
At this time, the Arthur M. Anderson had logged sustained winds of 50 knots, and by 6 p.m., the Anderson was struck by 70 to 75 knot wind gusts, or 81 to 86 miles per hour, and waves as high as 35 feet. By 7 p.m., the Anderson was within 9 miles of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The Anderson's crew could identify the Fitzgerald by the small blip on the radar. By 7:10, a snow squall struck, and the center of the radar became, quote, just a white blob. They watched as the Fitzgerald disappeared into the white blob. Minutes later, first mate of the Anderson, Morgan Clark, radioed Captain McSorley that they were approaching another ship 9 miles ahead and that they would clear the vessel. And he also added,
Oh, by the way, how are you making out with your problems?
with McSorley replying,
You're wholly alone.
that was the last radio call that the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson or anyone had heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. By 7:25, the snow squall had ceased, with visibility improving. The men in the Anderson's wheelhouse could no longer visually see or identify the Fitzgerald on the radar. The men peered into the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Edmund Fitzgerald's lights. Enormous waves were crashing against the Arthur M. Anderson, threatening to capsize her if the ship had turned broadside to the hurricane-force winds. Through the spray of water on the windows of the wheelhouse, wheelsman Robert L. May thought he saw red and green navigational lights. He then came to the conclusion that the red light was probably a radio tower from Coppermine Point on the Canadian shore. A short while later, first mate Clark spotted lights directly ahead. These lights belonged to 3 other vessels, the Nanfree, the Benfree, and the Avaforce, which were heading into Lake Superior from Whitefish Bay. The closest of the vessels Clark figured was 17 miles. The Fitzgerald, though, should have been half that distance, but no lights or ship were seen. Sin radioed other vessels in the area, asking if they could see the Fitzgerald, either visually or on their radars. They all replied with a dreaded no. By 11 p.m. on November 10th, local news and radio stations in the Great Lakes area had established that a missing ore freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, had apparently sank.
A freighter carrying a crew of 29 disappeared on Lake Superior during a severe storm last night, and so far, no survivors have been found. The freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves.
In the area where the Fitzgerald went down, a sister ship joined the search, but so far all that was found was an oil slick, life jackets, and an empty lifeboat. The huge freighter was last heard from shortly after 7 o'clock last night, when one of its officers radioed a nearby steamer to say the Fitzgerald was taking on water and had lost 2 hatch covers. Shortly after that, the freighter disappeared.
The Anderson ended up being the primary vessel to search for the Edmund Fitzgerald. Only one other ship was able to leave the safety of Whitefish Bay to join the Anderson in the search. The Coast Guard launched a fixed-wing HU-16 aircraft and dispatched 2 cutters from Duluth, Minnesota, the Naugatuck and the Woodrush. They had reached the last known location of the Edmund Fitzgerald on November 11th at 12:45 p.m. After an extensive search conducted by the Coast Guard, on November 14th, a U.S. Navy plane equipped with a magnetic anomaly detector located a strong contact north-northwest of Whitefish Point. During the next 3 days, the Coast Guard cutter Woodrush located 2 large pieces of wreckage using side-scan sonar. The following May, 1976, the Woodrush returned to the site to conduct a 3rd sonar test of the wreckage. The Navy then brought in its Curve 3 controlled underwater recovery vehicle, and on May 20th, 1976, the words Edmund Fitzgerald were clearly seen on the stern, upside down, under 535 feet of water. There are many theories surrounding the demise of the Edmund Fitzgerald and what had caused it to sink beneath the waves of Lake Superior. Of the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, the most probable cause of the sinking of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was the loss of buoyancy and stability resulting from massive flooding of the cargo hold. One theory is that the Fitzgerald had submarined into the waves, coming down from up the top of a crest of a wave, happening so fast that the crew had no time to even call for help over the radio. Another theory is that the Fitzgerald had taken damage to her hull on the 6 Fathom Shoal, a shallow ridge in Lake Superior, northwest of Caribou Island. However, divers had not found any recent damage to the shoal following the ship's sinking. A third theory is that the ship's demise was caused due to structural issues, and that some inspectors or people that had worked on the ship claimed that there were shoddy welds or some cracks in the ship's hull that weren't even fixed at all. As the ship was found in two pieces on the bottom of the lake, people theorized that it had broken up on some of these cracks or badly welded seams during its ups and downs between the massive waves on November 10th, 1975. Regardless of how the ship sank, all 29 crew members of the Edmund Fitzgerald had lost their lives that night. The wreck site has become a cemetery and a no-dive zone due to the fact that all 29 crew members' bodies are still inside the ship. And with all news stories that happen, they tend to disappear within a week or two, especially if they're not on the international level. And that's what happened with the story of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The news cycle moved on, and people other than the folks in the Great Lakes region or the families affected by the shipwreck had completely forgotten about its demise. That is until folk singer Gordon Lightfoot released his album Summertime Dreams in 1976. And on this album was a song that had captured the ears of everyone that lived around the Great Lakes region or families of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Radio stations received dozens of calls a day requesting to play this song on the radio, and within a few weeks, the song's interest had swept way past the Great Lakes region and took a national interest. Warner Brother Records had then made a single of this song, and before the first anniversary of the ship's demise, Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald had topped the pop music charts across the United States, setting the legend, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald and the gales of November in stone. In July of 1995, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Paradise, Michigan, along with the Canadian Navy, the Sault Ste. Marie, Tribe of Chippewa Indians, Sony, and National Geographic, organized, along with the families of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, to raise the ship's bell from the depths of Lake Superior. After cutting the mounts and the cables holding the bell in place, the bell was brought to the surface and eventually cleaned up and restored. On July 5th of that year, a replica of the ship's bell was brought back to the wreckage site and laid in place, and engraved on the side of the bell were the 29 names of the sailors that had lost their lives. The ship's original bell is now on display at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point. Every year, on November 10th, the families of the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald meet at Whitefish Point for a memorial ceremony, and the Edmund Fitzgerald's bell is rang 29 times, one for each crew member lost in the ship. After the 29 tolls, one more additional toll is rang on the bell to honor the estimated 30,000 lives of sailors lost in the Great Lakes in recorded history. Today marks 50 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald had met her end in the big lake they call Kitchigumi.